With 50 million viewers watching and 600 officials seated in silence, Barron Trump declared public schools were slowing America down. But just 9 seconds later, Jasmine Crockett fired back with a single line that froze the entire room. His polished speech collapsed instantly, while her raw truth born from classrooms he had never stepped inside cut deeper than any chart of numbers ever could. What did Jasmine say that shattered Barron Trump in seconds? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the high arches of Georgetown University's Gaston Hall, the National Education Summit carried a heavy tension. Marble columns shone under the lights. Velvet seats were filled with secretaries, union leaders, state chiefs, and top teachers flown in from every state. Backstage chatter stopped as cameras went live. Then came the shock. The doors opened, Barron Trump walked in, towering at nearly 6'8", wearing a sharp navy suit that screamed old wealth. He carried himself like someone born to command. No smile, no nod, just the confidence of entitlement passed down for generations. On his chest, the emblem read, Future Path, a lobbying group notorious for pushing charter schools and gutting public education. He was their special delegate. The front rows of billionaires and governors rose to applaud. The back rows of veteran public school teachers stayed frozen. At that moment, America's education divide had a face, a name, and a reserved seat. 5 rows back, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat still, her hands locked tight in her lap. Her jaw tensed, but her stare didn't waver. No spotlight, no fanfare. She slipped in through a side door, ignored by crews busy setting the stage for the Trump heir. While donors swooned over money and power, Jasmine waited in silence. Knowing this wasn't a summit, it was a battlefield dressed as ceremony. She had taught in crowded classrooms. She had defended mothers fined for truancy when buses never came. And now, with 50 million people watching, she would have to listen as a boy born into privilege dared to tell working teachers they had failed. Georgetown was meant to be neutral ground. Today, it felt like an arena where survival belonged to the loudest voice. The applause faded. A tense quiet settled, not of respect but of calculation. Barron Trump stepped to the mic. Jasmine held her breath. The arena was ready to be ruled, and the crowd expected to obey. Light struck his shoulders like a verdict, and Barron, draped in wealth and legacy, spoke as though America had been waiting for him. Public schools, he declared, steady and sharp, are holding America back. No hesitation, no stumble, not a question, but a judgment. He offered no data, his presence was meant to make it truth. He leaned forward, his voice hardening. We've built a culture where failure is excused, where effort is mistaken for excellence. Teachers shielded by tenure have no reason to try harder. Their jobs don't depend on results. He paused, letting the cut sink in. And students, they're being trained to settle for mediocrity. There's no drive, no fire to compete. In private schools, we're sharpened by rivalry. In public schools, they're smothered by policy. The word they lingered like smoke after a gunshot. He never said out loud that most of the they were black and brown kids. That many started their mornings with empty stomachs. That some walked through streets patrolled by both cops and fear just to reach old books and exhausted staff. He didn't have to. The code was clear. Jasmine felt it squeeze her chest like a vice. He wasn't tearing down a system, he was condemning the people inside it. People like her, like the classmates she once sat beside in freezing classrooms with taped-up windows. Barron turned to the giant screen. A sleek chart flashed. 2 columns, public and private. The colors made the choice look as obvious as good versus bad. He lifted his chin. The answer isn't pouring money into failure. The answer is to let success lead. We must fully privatize education. Let the market set the standard. Competition will lift the bar. Government has shown it can't. His tone was final, not suggested. He scanned the audience like a young prosecutor closing his case not for justice, but for efficiency. Innovation needs freedom, he declared. Right now, our students are trapped in a broken system. The silence that followed wasn't respect, it was order. For 7 long seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, like rehearsed theater, polite clapping began in the front. Donors in tailored suits nodded on cue. Tech executives gave just enough applause to hint at interest, not commitment. The sound stopped at the front rows. Students squirmed in their seats. A teacher in row 12 looked down, as though his words had cracked something deep inside her. No cheers, no standing ovations. Because in that 7-minute monologue, a boy with no chalk dust on his sleeves had turned millions of educators into the enemy. And Jasmine Crockett, still silent, unwavering, knew exactly what had just happened. That wasn't a speech. That was the opening move of a campaign, and it demanded an answer. The claps died away. The cameras cut to commercial. But outside those marble doors, the story was already breaking free. In the hallways, unease buzzed. Out on the lawn, the narrative slipped from stage lights into raw air. Clusters of teachers huddled under gray skies, clutching cold coffee. Some had traveled on stipends, others on unpaid leave, only to be dismissed as dead weight by a boy who had never taught a single day. They didn't yell. They recorded. One by one, phones lifted, red dots blinked, and teachers spoke not into podiums, but into their own truth. A math teacher from Philly, standing at a CHIP bus stop, looked into her camera. He says we're unmotivated? Let him teach 30 kids algebra who skip breakfast. A woman from East St. Louis gestured to a window boarded with plywood. 6 months, still not replaced. We tape it when storms hit. In Oakland, a chemistry teacher pointed at a cracked brick wall. He wants competition. Let him compete with the rats in my supply closet. No scripts, no speeches, just faces lined with fatigue and iron resolve. Local news crews gathered. MSNBC aired a Houston teacher standing by a rusted bus. He called us lazy, she said, raising a plastic bag filled with her own supplies. I haven't had a real lunch break in 5 years. I grade every weekend. I cry in my car twice a month, and I'm still here, still teaching. He wants to erase us with privatization? The Chiron was blunt. Barron Trump slams public schools teachers, clap back with reality. The contrast was too sharp to miss. Inside, warm lights, crisp suits, perfect sound. Outside, wind whistling through broken doors. And through those cracks, truth poured out. The marble doors shut. The spotlight shifted. But inside Gaston Hall, the air vibrated not with praise, not with awe, but with something older and heavier. Jasmine Crockett felt it fill her lungs as she stepped toward the same podium that had just held Barron's polished scorn. She didn't stride like a performer. She moved like an attorney walking into trial with evidence already in hand. No music, no fanfare, just the soft rhythm of heels on hardwood, her blazer plain, her notes thin. She needed neither. She was raised in colder rooms than this rooms where silence was the norm, and being heard was rare. Now, standing before a crowd just sold a vision of schools designed by people who never skipped a meal, she didn't blink. She clutched the podium not to hold herself up, but to anchor what was coming. Her voice, steady and low, cut clean through the hall. I didn't come from marble, she said. I came from mildew. The room froze. I sat in a classroom with 35 kids crammed inside, she began. 2 ceiling fans spun weakly, barely moving the air, while the crack of gunfire echoed just beyond the chain-link fence that circled our school like a warning sign. She didn't embellish. She didn't have to. The plain facts carried their own weight. Some mornings we stepped over broken glass, under police tape, past bloodstains on the steps before the first bell even rang. Her voice stayed firm, sharpening as she turned not to the cameras or the ceiling, but straight at Barron Trump, sitting polished and smug, as if he were there to judge a contest, not witness a fight. Tell me, Barron, she asked, quiet but cutting. Have you ever opened a textbook printed the same year your father was impeached? No gas followed, only a silence too heavy to deflect. Because I have. Not once, but over and over. Math books with missing pages. History that stopped at 1989. Science lessons that skipped a decade because our district couldn't afford to replace them. Her stare didn't waver. It wasn't anger, it was duty. You say public schools are failing. I say they've been abandoned and still, somehow, they refuse to collapse. Her fingers tightened on the podium, not from fear, but from years of silence finally sharpening into truth. You say teachers don't care. I've seen them skip meals to buy pencils. I've seen them sob in their cars because a student's brother was killed the night before. She paused, letting the room inhale. Just once. Long enough for everyone to realize this wasn't a reply, it was a reckoning. You call privatization an upgrade. You think competition is the cure, but we've been competing all along. Competing for textbooks, for working air conditioners, for counselors who aren't already burned out. Her voice never shook. This wasn't theater. It was memory turned into defiance. You didn't walk into a broken system today, Barron. You walked into one that refuses to die, no matter how many times it's told it's worthless. Still, she hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. The room was hers now, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it, word by word, scar by scar. Everyone listening knew this wasn't just one woman speaking. This was a generation finally heard. The silence had changed. No longer cold, it pulsed with tension alive, waiting. Jasmine Crockett stood steady, calm voice, unshaken presence. She had just asked Barron Trump if he'd ever studied from a book older than him, and the question still hung in the air like smoke. But Jasmine wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, her words slower now, pulled from a place so deep it still stung to touch. There was a boy I knew, she said, softer yet stronger. His name was Marcus. A pause, not for effect, just for breath. He sat beside me for almost 4 years. Always neat, always polite. Glasses too big for his face, carrying every book like it mattered. He raised his hand every time, even when he wasn't sure. He stayed after class to help clean, even when no one asked. And he had this laugh, a quiet, half laugh, like happiness was fragile, like it might break if he let it out too strong. The hall was still, yet breathing with her. Phones lowered, fingers stilled. Marcus was brilliant, she went on. Math was easy. Reading came quick. He didn't just learn, he loved learning. Teachers would say, Marcus is the one who'll make it out. He'll go far. We believed it, all of us did. Her grip on the podium tightened, not in rage, but in remembrance. But in our neighborhood, belief wasn't enough. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't have to. The weight of what was next pressed down before the words even landed. One afternoon after school, Marcus stayed to play basketball on the yard. One hoop, no net. Just a metal rim bolted to a rusted board. The court cracked so wide you could trip and break your ankle if you weren't careful. But we played anyway. That was our place, our peace. Her eyes locked forward, daring the room to follow. A car rolled by, she said flatly. Nothing unusual, just another car on another street. Then someone shouted. Then the gunshot came. A silence heavier than before filled the hall. The bullet ripped through the chain-link fence, she said. Marcus wasn't the target. He was just there. He dropped to the ground, clutching his chest. The ball rolled off into the gutter. Somewhere in the crowd, a breath caught. We all ran to him, Jasmine went on, her voice tightening just enough to sting. He was still conscious, still trying to speak. But by the time the ambulance pulled up, he wasn't breathing anymore. Her next words came slow, each one heavy, like footsteps behind a casket. 12 years old, straight A student, never once in detention, never missed a single day, gone. She paused, brief but sharp. And he's not some shocking exception, she said. He's not just a headline. He's not a forgotten note in history. He's ordinary in neighborhoods where survival is demanded more than success. Jasmine drew in a breath and let her hands ease from the podium. Her eyes swept the audience, not accusing, not condemning, but unflinchingly honest. You want to talk about competition? She asked, her tone hardening. We competed every day, not for Ivy League spots, for the chance to make it home alive. She leaned back slightly, her voice lower but heavier than before. Barron stood here and said public school kids have no drive, that we're soft, that we don't know what fighting is. She shook her head slowly. We fought for everything. Then came the line not shouted, not forced, but earned by every scar behind her words. We didn't choose to fall behind. We chose to survive. The room stayed frozen for 2 long seconds, then a single clap, another, then more, until the hall filled with applause, not loud, not staged, but raw. The kind that rises not from showmanship, but from pain, from recognition. Jasmine didn't smile. didn't bow. She stood steady, face controlled, but her eyes told another story. A story that said, this is what you overlooked. This is what you never faced. This is what you still don't understand. And for the first time that day, no one looked toward Barron Trump. Not the cameras, not the crowd, not even the moderator. Because in that instant, the spotlight had shifted, and it wasn't moving back. The applause faded, but the air stayed charged, like a storm waiting to break. Jasmine's words still vibrated through the hall, her story about Marcus cutting too deep to dismiss. But Barron Trump sat unmoved, waiting, ready. His turn had come to fight back, not with stories, but with stats, not with memory, but with theory. He leaned forward, calm, polished, adjusting his mic like he was about to brief a boardroom instead of a nation. Listen, he began, smooth even, flawless in posture. No one is denying the hardships. Of course, problems exist. No one disputes that. His tone was silk, meant not to inflame but to erase. But throwing more money at a system this broken? That's not compassion. That's waste. He paused, letting the words sit just long enough to recast Jasmine's truth as emotional, heartfelt, but misguided. We've been funding it for decades, he pressed on. And what's changed? Scores are dropping. Graduation rates are weak. Buildings are falling apart faster than budgets can cover. The foundation itself is rotten. You don't fix a collapsing house with more paint, you tear it down and start fresh. He leaned back, fingers interlaced, confidence radiating, certain, settled, as though he had spoken the final word. To some, his words sounded logical, polished, reasonable, but underneath they were empty. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush to reply. She stood behind the podium, her face unreadable, her silence louder than any argument. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to the audience, it was to Barron, and to the world of privilege that had placed him there. The money, she said slow and clear, has already been spent. The words hit like iron. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because what followed wasn't opinion, it was accusation. But not on heaters for classrooms in Mississippi, not on new textbooks in East St. Louis, not on working science labs in rural Alabama, not on clean drinking water in Detroit. Each phrase struck sharper than the last. You want to talk about waste? Let's talk about what we decided to fund instead. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, not for drama, but because the truth demanded closeness. We built domed stadiums for private schools that already had 5 fields. We gave elite prep academies indoor climbing walls. We bought private buses with leather seats and surround sound, while public school kids walked miles down roads without sidewalks. Her eyes locked onto Barron, not with fury, but with something far more dangerous to privilege: clarity. You say the system is broken, Jasmine said, but let's be honest, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. The room hushed. It works for the wealthy, for the privileged, for those who can buy choice and call it freedom, while the rest are told to wait and be thankful for scraps. Her hands gripped the podium not to steady herself, but to anchor the weight of what came next. This isn't about spending more money, she said. It's about where the money goes. And it doesn't go to Marcus. It doesn't go to his teacher, who bought paper from her own check. It doesn't go to the school nurse with 1 thermometer for 50 kids. It doesn't go to the buildings with mold in the walls and no heat in winter. And the truth is, you already know that. Her gaze pushed past Barron, past the rows of CEOs and donors, past the cameras. It landed in the quiet places, in homes where parents worked 3 jobs to keep kids in failing schools, in classrooms where teachers cried behind closed doors, in cafeterias where children learned to hide their hunger. You call it inefficient, she said, her tone turning grave. But this isn't inefficiency. This is abandonment. A choice made again and again to put luxury over need, legacy over fairness, comfort over justice. She stepped back, not finished, but giving the room a second to catch up to the blow they'd just taken. I've watched football budgets triple while literacy programs vanished. I've seen districts shut entire schools, but approve $8 million for stage lights in a prep academy, already nicer than most colleges. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate. Then she turned back to Barron, her voice quiet now but ringing with finality. You didn't inherit a broken system, Barron. You inherited a stolen one. No one moved. No one dared. Even the light seemed dimmer, as if the building itself knew the gravity had shifted. And still, Jasmine stood firm, steady at the podium, unshaken, unflinching. This wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about values. And for once, truth spoke louder than power. The room still hummed with tension, but Barron Trump didn't wait for it to ease. He leaned forward, remote in hand, clicking with the ease of someone used to controlling the story from boardrooms, not classrooms. A bright slide appeared, neat bars, arrows pointing up, percentages glowing like gospel. According to the Heritage Foundation, he began, smooth and rehearsed, private school students consistently outperform public school students in college admissions. He turned to the crowd, dropping the line like a verdict. This isn't opinion, this is fact. Private institutions succeed. Public ones, by comparison, fail. Another click this time, SAT scores, shaded to highlight the gap. The numbers don't lie, he added, steady and sure. If we care about outcomes, we should follow the models that work. His face stayed calm, as if the graphs behind him were scripture untouchable, unquestionable. But behind that neat veneer of data was a silence that throbbed like a bruise. He hadn't said a word about tuition fees or private coaches. Nothing about families paying six figures for access. Nothing about guidance counselors drowning with 500 students each, or kids working night shifts to pay rent, or schools with one printer for 300 teenagers. He hadn't admitted that when you graph privilege against survival, of course the throne looks stronger. And Jasmine Crockett knew, as every public school teacher in that hall knew, what those numbers really meant. But Barron stood tall, proud, lit by charts designed to shine. The glow behind him didn't fade because the data stopped. It faded because the room stopped believing. Jasmine stood still, her fingers resting lightly on the podium, like a pianist ready to strike the first note of a requiem. The graphs, the numbers, the facts still hung in the air like polished glass. But glass, no matter how perfect, could always be shattered. And Jasmine didn't need a pointer. She had something sharper memory. She leaned forward, not closer to the mic, but closer to the truth. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of lived experience. Each word chosen, each pause sharp. You say private school kids do better, that they get into college more often, that the data proves what works. Her eyes didn't flicker. But numbers don't show what it feels like to sit across from your little sister at the kitchen table, watching her read from a book held together with masking tape. The room froze. She never complained, Jasmine said, her voice tight but steady. She ran her fingers across the page, skipping over the missing sentences, guessing what might have been there. The cover was gone. The spine was split. The pages didn't turn, they fell out. Her gaze stayed forward, not on the crowd, not on Barron, but on the truth itself. It wasn't outdated because it was old. It was outdated because it was the only one. One copy for 27 children. And you think test scores measure that? She stopped, not to breathe, but to let the silence answer. Numbers don't capture what it means to share a book across 3 desks. They don't show the look on a teacher's face when they ask for resources and get told to be more creative. And they don't track the shame in a child's eyes when they pretend they forgot their homework, when really the power had been cut off at home. Her voice dropped lower, each word striking like a verdict. So don't show me charts, she said, and pretend they erase poverty. Don't wave percentages like they cancel out the reality of building an education out of broken pieces. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And yet something in the room was rising, a current, unseen but undeniable. At the front of the hall where the suits and polished shoes sat, something shifted. A CEO who had been leaning back with arms crossed slowly lowered them. Another, who had been typing on his phone, slid it quietly into his lap. And then one man, gray suit, cufflinks shining, gave a single nod. It wasn't polite. It wasn't empty. It was the kind of nod that said, I didn't come here to agree with you, but now I can't unsee what you've made me see. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She didn't break the moment, because she hadn't come to perform. She had come to testify, and her truth had just shattered the glass of those numbers. The nod shifted the air, But Jasmine wasn't done, not with her words and not with him. The crowd had seen enough charts. They had heard enough theories. What they hadn't seen, what they needed, was the kind of test no statistic could pass. Jasmine drew a breath, stepped forward, and froze the room once more. She didn't shout. She didn't need volume. She had precision. "Barron," she said, voice flat, steady, deadly clear. "Since you're so sure of your theories, since you're certain public schools are the problem and private schools are the model, then here's my challenge." She had the silence in her hand now, thick enough that even the camera shifted to catch it. "Come with me. Visit 3 public schools in Texas. No press team, no handlers, no stage routes. Just you, me, and the truth. Are you in?" The words snapped shut like a trap. Her eyes never left him. The force behind them, not anger, but challenge. A challenge you couldn't spin, only survive. She pressed on, each line as sharp as a charge in court. "Let's go to the Rio Grande Valley, to the edge of Houston, to a rural school where the ceiling leaks and the air conditioning wheezes like it's dying. No VIP doors, no big donations. Just the real thing. Let's see if your graphs hold up beside kids eating breakfast out of vending machines and buckets catching rain in classrooms." Then she stopped. The room pivoted. All eyes locked on Barron Trump, who, for the first time, had no script. Just the truth staring back. He didn't grab the mic. He didn't flip his notes. His hands, once folded in confidence, twitched slightly. His jaw shifted once. His mouth stayed closed, and the cameras caught it. The live stream zoomed in, not on Jasmine, but on him. A close-up, eyes blinking, throat tight, a flicker of panic behind the gaze of a young man who had always been handed stages, never confronted with them. Silence, weaponized, poured over him. 1 second. 2. Still nothing. Jasmine didn't move. Her face stayed still, because she already knew what silence meant. The nation watched. The room held its breath, not because someone was speaking, but because someone wasn't. This was no longer debate, it was trial by fire, and the accused had no defense. Somewhere in the back, a whisper. "Say something." But it wasn't to Jasmine, still nothing. The image burned onto screens everywhere. Barron Trump, heir to $1 billion name, jaw tight, eyes wide, sitting in a chair suddenly too big, under lights suddenly too hot. And Jasmine, she didn't blink, because to her, silence was never emptiness. It was the sound of power running out of excuses. Barron Trump's silence didn't stay inside Gaston Hall. It spilled out, seeping under doors, racing across the world before the lights even dimmed. What began as a challenge on stage exploded online in minutes. The clip Jasmine's challenge, her stare, his silence was ripped and shared instantly. No edits, no polish, just raw truth. And the internet tore into it like sharks into blood. No one waited for commentary. They didn't need it. The image of Barron Trump, frozen under a truth he couldn't answer, was stronger than any spin that could follow. Within half an hour, the first tweet exploded. Jasmine just dared Barron to step inside a real public school. He blinked, hard. Beneath it, the flood started. Teachers from across the nation began posting snapshots of their classrooms' walls with peeling paint, rusted pipes, ceiling tiles yellowed from years of leaks. "He should start here," wrote a teacher from rural West Virginia, standing in a library with only 5 books. Then another voice. "Or maybe this is what success looks like to him," said a Chicago principal, showing a cafeteria line spilling out onto the street because the lunchroom was too small. And then it happened. The hashtag was born, not crafted by a PR machine, not tested in focus groups, but typed out by one furious, exhausted parent in Texas. Barron visit a real school. No gimmicks, no irony, just a demand. Within an hour, it was trending in Houston. 2 hours later, Los Angeles. By nightfall, it was the #1 trend in America, outpacing celebrity gossip, scandals, even the NFL meltdown of the week. Because people weren't just posting, they were revealing. A school nurse in Detroit uploaded a photo of her supplies. 2 boxes of Band-Aids and 1 inhaler. "This is my ER," she wrote. A student in the Bronx snapped a selfie beside a busted vending machine littered with mouse droppings. Maybe Barron can grab lunch here next time he talks about competition. And it wasn't only educators or students. Veterans spoke up. Factory workers joined in. Even former administrators who had once stayed quiet came forward. The silence of years had broken, and now the roar was everywhere. By 7 p.m., local news stations looped Jasmine's challenge and Barron's silence. Some headlines called it a shocking live moment. Others, the clash Georgetown didn't see coming, but the meaning was the same. One voice came from experience, the other from emptiness. And that contrast had cut through the noise like few moments ever had. On CNN, the clip led primetime. The screen split in two. Jasmine, unshaken, mid-sentence. Barron, frozen, silent under the lights. The anchor asked, "What happens when privilege runs out of places to hide?" The panel didn't answer. They couldn't, because the answer had just unfolded before the nation's eyes. On TikTok, remix videos surged. One creator layered Jasmine's words with thunderclaps, cutting between her challenge and images of broken schools, flickering lights, tattered books. Another looped Barron's silence, his blinking, his clenched jaw, and captioned it. He never thought someone would force him to see the truth up close. Within hours, millions had watched. But Twitter was the epicenter. To Barron visit, a real school wasn't just trending, it was roaring. A collective outcry from the forgotten corners of America's classrooms. It wasn't only about Barron anymore. It was about every lawmaker who slashed school budgets at gala dinners. Every billionaire who praised choice without ever walking into a school with no heat. Every pundit who sold reform without ever knowing what it meant to choose between homework and hunger. And Jasmine, she didn't tweet. She didn't need to. Her words had already spilled into every feed, every inbox, every late-night conversation. Even kids at elite prep schools were sharing the clip, stunned at the contrast. At one Connecticut academy, a humanities teacher paused class, played the video, and asked, "When you grow up, which side of this do you want to be on?" Meanwhile, inside Barron's circle, silence became strategy. No comments, no tweets. His press aide refused interviews. His father's spokesman called it a non-issue. But online, people weren't buying it. They had already decided that silence wasn't humility. It was fear. By midnight, memes flooded in. A luxury SUV parked outside a collapsing school. Barron made it to the real world for 3 minutes. Jasmine standing over a burning Heritage Foundation report. Her challenge replayed over images of crowded classrooms. The humor wasn't cheap. It was sharp. Beneath it all, the deeper current wasn't mockery, it was recognition. For decades, teachers, parents, and students had shouted into the void about schools no one wanted to look at. Now one woman's challenge and one young man's silence had cracked the dam. Jasmine hadn't just spoken. She had triggered a reckoning. And at the heart of it, 5 words pulsed across every screen. Barron visit a real school. This wasn't a moment. It was a movement. The hashtag still burned online. The air in Gaston Hall still thick. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't landed her final strike. The crowd felt it like thunder waiting behind dark clouds. They leaned forward, bracing for something permanent. Not numbers, not charts. Something human. Something carved out of scars and conviction. She didn't lift her voice. She lowered it. And that made it cut even deeper. Her hands stayed still. Her body didn't shift. Only her words did. "I want to be clear," she said, her tone flat, sharp, slicing past politeness into bone. "We are not angry that wealthy kids go to safe schools. We are angry that the rest of us are told we must earn that safety." Her eyes swept the rows, not at Barron anymore, but at the CEOs, the senators, the donors with polished shoes and tailored suits. "It isn't wrong that the rich get good schools. What's wrong is the belief that the poor don't deserve them." The room didn't breathe. And then she spoke. "If we want America to lead the world," she stepped forward, not toward anyone, but toward the truth itself. "Then we have to start investing in the child whose name you'll never know. The one who walks 3 miles to class. The one who eats dinner from a vending machine. The one who never shows up in your spreadsheets but will inherit your country." She paused, not for drama, but because the entire room had frozen. Until we do that, we're not a meritocracy. We're just a mirror reflecting everything we refuse to fix. And with that, she stepped back. For 5 long seconds, silence gripped the hall. Not the kind owned by one side, but the kind that falls when everyone realizes they've just heard something that can't be erased. Then came the sound, not polite applause, not reserved, but raw, full applause. It didn't start with the front rows. It rose from the teachers in the back, from the students in the wings, from the janitor by the side door, arms crossed, eyes locked on Jasmine the whole time. It swept forward like a wave crashing over hesitation. Reporters stopped typing. Phones stopped buzzing. Even the cameras refused to look away. They stayed fixed on Jasmine, because she was now the center of the national conversation. By nightfall, her words were everywhere. It started as a tweet, 4 lines, black text, white background. No emojis, no logo. Just, the rich aren't wrong for getting a good education. They're wrong for thinking the poor don't deserve the same. If we want America to lead the world, we must invest in the child you don't know by name. Reparent. Jasmine Crockett. Within 20 minutes, it had 80,000 retweets. Teachers began printing it themselves. First Houston, then Atlanta, then Fresno, where a superintendent posted a photo of the quote, laminated and pinned to 3 middle school doors, captioned, "Every student deserves to walk through these words." The moment didn't need branding. It became a movement on its own. By morning, posters were arriving in mailboxes paid for by a grassroots education nonprofit that hadn't even existed 2 days earlier. They printed 50,000, then doubled it. Principals ordered stacks. Soon, cafeterias, hallways, teachers' lounges, and office windows across the nation bore her words. Within 72 hours, more than 600 public schools displayed the quote. In Miami, a teacher taped it above her board. She said nothing. Her class fell silent on its own. "It's the first time I've seen every student stop," she recalled. "They didn't ask who she was. They didn't ask what party. They just knew." In Oklahoma, a 9th grader looked at the poster and whispered to her counselor, "Do you think someone finally sees us?" In Detroit, a mother walked into her son's school, saw the quote framed by the front desk, and wept before she spoke a word. CNN replayed the clip on loop. MSNBC plastered the quote over images of crumbling schools. Even late-night shows picked it up, not for comedy, but awe. "You don't hear words like that in Congress," one host said. "You hear them in history books." And somewhere in a school with flickering lights and a broken PA system, a little girl stood in line for free lunch beneath a poster that told her, maybe for the first time, that someone in power hadn't forgotten her. That's what a single sentence can do. Not a slogan, not spin, a sentence. 12 seconds of truth that didn't just clap back, it tore through apathy, privilege, and the hollow politics of a boy in a suit who came to dominate and instead drowned in silence. And Jasmine? She walked out alone. No reporters trailing her, no entourage, just a slow exit through the side door of the nation's most powerful university, while her words walked into the places cameras never go. Into schools where hope is rationed like food stamps. Into classrooms where truth isn't tweeted, but whispered between cracked windows and battered desks. That's how change happens. Not with a headline, but with a line that finally lands. The applause had barely faded when Jasmine Crockett left the stage, but the momentum she lit was only beginning. The silence that once filled the room was now replaced by voices rising behind her. In the days that followed, her words echoed across the country not just as a call, but as the spark of action. To turn that energy into real support for struggling public schools, Jasmine launched an initiative called Project Level Field. Its mission was simple: close the gap in education for marginalized communities. Within hours, it caught fire. Donations poured in. Teachers, parents, alumni, even corporations stepped up, united by the same vision. In 4 days, the project raised over $12 million, proof that a sentence, spoken at the right moment, can build a movement strong enough to change the field itself. The money was put to work immediately fixing crumbling school buildings, replacing outdated textbooks, and giving teachers the tools they'd been begging for. Schools long left behind started to change, not just in how they looked, but in how students and staff felt when they walked through the doors. The shift was visible, undeniable, a sign that education could be rebuilt to serve everyone. But Jasmine's project wasn't only about dollars. It sparked something larger, a national reckoning about the worth of public schools and the urgency of investing in every child's future. Project Level Field proves something simple but profound. When communities come together with purpose, real change isn't just possible, it's unstoppable. The applause had faded. The posters were already taped to school walls. The fundraising was underway. But one figure was conspicuously absent: Barron Trump. He had marched into Georgetown's Gaston Hall under marble arches, surrounded by cameras, privilege, and certainty. He had spoken with the voice of someone raised to never doubt himself. But after Jasmine's challenge, all that shine collapsed into silence, louder than anything he could have said. In the 4 days since the summit, not one word had been heard from him. No tweets, no statements, not even a whispered comment to the press. And that silence, it wasn't strategy, it was surrender. Networks scrambled for scraps. CNN sent crews to camp outside the Trump residence. MSNBC replayed footage of his face the second Jasmine delivered her challenge, frame by frame. Fox News tried to run cover with a sympathetic panel, but even their host couldn't explain his vanishing act. He was scheduled to appear on Face the Nation that Friday. He backed out with no reason. He had booked a sit-down with Bloomberg Education to roll out a policy roadmap on charter schools. Canceled, gone. Future Path, the lobbying group that had showcased him, issued a bland press release. We continue to support Barron's leadership in education equity and respect his need for temporary privacy. But within 48 hours, leaked emails told the real story. Donors fleeing, staff panicking, and quiet efforts to distance the brand from the boy who froze on national TV. And the silence spread beyond politics. His social media, once run by a full-time team, went dark. No Instagram posts, no tweets, no threads. A planned Reddit Ask Me Anything disappeared. The subreddit built around his policy journey dissolved into infighting. The top-voted comments summed it up. He had one shot to rise and he blinked. Among conservative donors, the mood turned. He had been groomed as the heir to a cleaner, calmer Trump brand, a figure suburban moderates could tolerate. But Georgetown didn't just bruise that story, it shattered it. The problem wasn't that he was challenged. The problem was that he was invited calmly, respectfully, to step outside his bubble, and he refused. Reporters who once had easy access now described sending requests into a void. One said, "It was like emailing into a cave. No reply. Not even a no comment. Just nothing." A former campaign consultant was blunter. He froze, and now he's ghosting the country. But the silence that mattered most wasn't from pundits. It was from students. Public school kids had watched the clip. They saw Jasmine alone, fearless, say what no one else would, and they saw Barron 6'8", born into wealth, stare at the floor when asked to simply look. One TikTok nailed it, split screen. Jasmine on the left saying, "Let's visit 3 schools, no PR, just truth." On the right, Barron blinking, silent. The text read, "You can't lead a country if you can't walk its hallways." 14 million views in 2 days. The silence itself became the headline. "Where is Barron Trump?" splashed across morning shows. The vanishing of a political heir, Vanity Fair. No mic, no fight, no future path. Rolling Stone, this wasn't just media thirst. It was the whole left behind. Georgetown made something undeniable. America's students don't need more theories. They need leaders willing to see them. And when Barron was given the simplest test, show up, unfiltered, and listen, he chose silence. That retreat didn't stay private. Even allies spoke out. A former Trump education advisor tweeted, "Leadership isn't about ideas, it's about courage." Where was his? A right-wing YouTuber asked, "If Barron can't last 7 minutes with Jasmine Crockett, how's he supposed to last with a country in crisis?" The phrase caught like wildfire. 7 minutes of Jasmine trended for 3 straight days. Inside Future Path's glass towers in D.C., panic spread. Phones slammed. A planned expansion campaign was shelved. A consulting firm yanked their branding package. One leaked memo to Politico carried a single chilling note scrawled in red ink. Barron cannot be the face. Find replacement voice. Urgent. Still no statement, no footage, no apology, no explanation. And that silence, it wasn't tactical. It was fatal. Because while Barron disappeared, Jasmine moved. She showed up at 2 town halls without fanfare. She walked into a middle school in southern Louisiana with no press, only to be filmed by a custodian who posted it on Facebook. She came to listen. That's all. And that was everything. She gave just one interview on PBS sitting across from a veteran teacher and a 16-year-old named Tasha. The student looked into the camera and said, "He had all the cameras in the world and he stayed silent. You had none, and you made the world listen." Jasmine only smiled. She didn't need to answer. The silence had already answered for her. The longer Barron stayed hidden, the clearer it became. The country had been promised a leader, but got a shadow. And in the very halls where his face had once been paraded as a brand, a new name began to rise. Not as a candidate, not as a product, but as a reminder. Jasmine Crockett, the woman who didn't beg for attention. She demanded answers, and the boy who couldn't give them, still silent. In the months that followed, Jasmine's words did more than echo, they solidified. They were carved into case studies, projected on lecture screens, debated in classrooms from coast to coast. What began as a raw clash between privilege and lived truth became curriculum. At the University of Chicago's School of Public Policy, a professor dimmed the lights in Lecture Hall C and replayed the now iconic clip. Jasmine staring into the lens, her voice low and cutting. "Have you ever studied from a book held together with duct tape, Barron?" The class sat frozen, not bored, but gripped. This wasn't politics anymore. This was precedent. From Columbia to Stanford, Howard to Georgetown, the showdown became mandatory study material in public narrative, crisis management, political ethics, even media psychology. It wasn't taught only for the words spoken, but for the silence that followed. Professors dissected Barron's blank stare frame by frame, pausing on the instant his composure cracked. They traced the clash back to its roots, inherited privilege against systemic poverty. But it was Jasmine's control that stole the spotlight, her ability to strike with stories instead of stats, with empathy instead of fury. At Harvard Kennedy School, her words were placed beside speeches from Obama, RFK, even Malcolm X, not because of fame, but because of precision. "We don't choose to be underfunded. We choose to survive." That line now adorns the walls of 4 university libraries. No longer just a quote, a principle. The transformation from viral clip to academic doctrine was swift and intentional. Students in media studies asked, how does one woman rewrite a national story with a single microphone? No graphics, no handlers, no script. The answer wasn't charm, it was courage and contrast. Jasmine hadn't just debated Barron. She dismantled an ideology built on Polish instead of substance. And she did it without shouting, without slogans. She wielded memory as a blade, and every public school student in America felt it cut. At Yale, one seminar carried the title, "When Silence Speaks Loudest, the Barron-Trump Non-Response." The syllabus dissected posture, blinking, and micro-expressions in the final 15 seconds of Jasmine's challenge. One student wrote, "He didn't lose to her arguments, he lost to her presence." Another added, "That silence cost more than any ad I ever could." And while Barron stayed invisible, Jasmine became assigned reading. Her testimony was turned into a published case file by MIT's Comparative Policy Lab. The cover showed a black and white photo of the Georgetown microphone, surrounded by empty chairs. Inside were charts of budget flows, maps of school zoning inequality, and transcripts from teachers who had filmed their own classroom, rebuttals to Barron's words clips now used in sociology courses to show grassroots resistance in the digital age. At Northwestern's School of Communication, one module was titled Narrative as Warfare. The lesson, in the modern battlefield, truth doesn't need armor, just exposure. Jasmine had no super PAC, no entourage. She had memory, honesty, and enough grit to burn through marble. Her voice didn't echo because it was loud. It echoed because it was real. And on final exams across more than one university, the question read, "You're in the room. Cameras live. You have 3 minutes to respond to the claim that public schools are obsolete. What do you say? Some reach for policy, others for data, but none surpass Jasmine's closing line. If we want America to lead, we have to invest in the child whose name you'll never know. Now that sentence isn't just viral, it's printed in textbooks. But more than that, it's remembered. What began as a summit became a syllabus. What began as a debate became doctrine. And what began as silence became the loudest classroom in America. When the cameras shut down, when the lights dimmed, when the applause melted into the cold Washington air, what remained wasn't just a clip or a headline. It was a lesson the country couldn't unsee. Because beyond the spectacle, Jasmine Crockett left behind the one thing power fears most: clarity. She tore the shine off the myth that effort alone decides success. She pulled back the slogans and revealed what America avoids admitting: that the playing field has never been level. That some children run uphill barefoot while others glide across polished marble. Professors could teach it. Journalists could print it. But the people felt it. From rural Mississippi to the Bronx, cafeteria workers, single mothers, night shift teachers, and the invisible backbone of public schools finally heard their lives not just defended, but spoken aloud with precision and fire. That's why this wasn't just another political flashpoint. It was a moral checkpoint. One of those rare moments when the gap between what is and what should be screamed so loud that even those pretending not to hear had to stop. For many, the real lesson wasn't about policy, it was about dignity. In a country obsessed with rewarding the polished, the loud, and the wealthy, Jasmine had taken the microphone for the voiceless and wielded it like a blade. The truth she delivered was simple. Truth isn't always polite. It isn't always wrapped in civility. Sometimes it shows up in worn shoes, with a southern drawl, and a stare sharp enough to cut glass. And when it does, no amount of tailored suits or think tank white papers can shield those standing on shaky moral ground. That night, beneath velvet curtains and marble pillars, Barron carried charts. Jasmine Crockett carried scars. He cited the Heritage Foundation. She cited the bloodstains on the steps of her childhood school. And that difference, it made the nation pause. Not out of shame, not even out of guilt, but because it reminded everyone of a truth often forgotten. Compassion only matters when it costs something. And Jasmine had been paying that price for years. Her story became a parable for this generation. Not because it was pretty, but because it was raw. Not because it was loud, but because it was earned. She didn't need to mock him. She didn't need to shout him down. She only asked, "Have you ever learned to read from a book so torn it was the only one for the whole class?" And in that moment, the stage stopped being a debate. It became a reckoning. The deeper truth, empathy, real empathy, isn't a personality trait. It's a choice. It's showing up even when the odds are against you. It's standing your ground when no one's watching. It's refusing to let your silence become someone else's suffering. So now, professors teach it. Preachers cite it. High schoolers act it out in debate club. And in hundreds of underfunded classrooms, Jasmine Crockett's words hang on walls not as decoration, but as a dare. What will you do once you know the truth? Because truth doesn't need applause to last. It needs courage. And if America has any future at all, it won't be written by heirs to dynasties, but by the daughters of public schools who refuse to sit down when told to. That's the lesson, and it cannot be unlearned. Not anymore. As headlines faded and screens went black, something deeper remained, something more lasting than hashtags or debate points. What endured was the human cost of silence, the weight of being unseen, and the courage it takes to speak not for applause, but for those who never had a microphone. The true lesson wasn't left versus right. It wasn't about charters or budgets. It was about value, who this country decides is worth seeing and who it leaves invisible. Jasmine Crockett did not rise that day to defend a policy. She rose to defend kids like Marcus, who never saw 13, her sister who had to read from a book taped together because the school couldn't afford another. In a world that prizes polish, her power came from her scars. She didn't hide them. She made them the centerpiece. The human lesson was clear. Justice isn't abstract. It's a heater that works in the winter. It's a textbook with all its pages. It's the line between scraping by and actually thriving. And above all, it's knowing no child should be expected to rise while carrying more weight than their future can hold. Barron Trump embodied legacy. Jasmine embodied reality. And reality struck back not with bitterness, but with truth sharp enough to draw blood. Universities labeled it a masterclass in messaging. Commentators called it a political earthquake. But for millions watching from living rooms and school libraries, it became a mirror. A mirror that asked, what kind of nation lets children freeze in packed classrooms while billionaires debate efficiency? What kind of system blames the broken for not building their own ladders? This wasn't just about education. It was about living close to pain. Jasmine Crockett didn't theorize, she testified. And when she looked Barron Trump in the eye and asked if he had ever heard gunfire during math class, she wasn't acting. She was remembering. And that memory became a map for every teacher, parent, and student who needed permission to say, what we live through matters. The aftershocks did not fade with the trending hashtags. They dug in, spreading through school districts, congressional hearings, church pulpits, and union halls. What Georgetown had witnessed was no longer an isolated exchange. It had become a litmus test for leadership, morality, and courage. In Washington, whispers moved quickly. Policy aides passed around the Georgetown transcript like contraband. Some read it in secret, unwilling to admit that a moment of truth had outshone years of think tank reports. Others dissected it openly, realizing that Jasmine Crockett had accomplished something rare. She had turned lived pain into political currency, the kind that no pollster could predict but every strategist feared. On Capitol Hill, debates shifted tone. A new education bill that once seemed destined to stall was suddenly injected with urgency. Democrats quoted Jasmine directly. "We don't choose to be underfunded, we choose to survive," echoed across the chamber. Even a handful of Republicans, careful not to praise her by name, admitted that public schools deserve renewed attention. For once, the words weren't about optics, they were about survival. Outside the marble walls of Congress, the movement pulsed harder. Teachers' unions launched a campaign using Jasmine's quotes on billboards in battleground states. In Milwaukee, bus drivers painted her words across the sides of their yellow buses. Every child deserves safety before success. In Texas, cafeteria workers staged a silent protest by placing duct tape books on the lunch tables of every middle school. A visual reminder of the question she had asked Barron. Have you ever learned from a book held together with tape? It wasn't just adults. Students carried it further. A group of ninth graders in Denver formed a club called the Survivors, not to wallow in struggle, but to turn Jasmine's words into organizing. They held after-school tutoring for kids who couldn't afford private lessons. They filmed short TikToks walking through their own underfunded classrooms, overlaying Jasmine's audio. One video of a student opening a bathroom stall door that fell off its hinges hit 5 million views overnight with the caption, "This is what we survive." Meanwhile, Barron's silence thickened. Future Paths offices tried damage control, commissioning op-eds in sympathetic outlets, floating whispers about media bias. None of it stuck, because the image of him blinking, jaw tight, unable to speak that image was too powerful. It was replayed in classrooms, in union halls, in town meetings. Every attempt to redirect the narrative snapped back like a rubber band. By the second month, donors had vanished. By the third, think tank panels quietly pulled Barron from their guest lists. And by the fourth, one strategist admitted anonymously, "We built him as a brand, but brands can't survive silence. Silence is death." Jasmine, on the other hand, didn't campaign, didn't posture, didn't sell the moment. She worked. She showed up in Cleveland, in Jackson, in Fresno. No entourage, no red carpets, just walking into schools that smelled of mold and chalk, listening more than she spoke. Parents said she was the first national figure who had ever walked their halls without cameras. Students described her visits as the opposite of a speech because she asked questions instead of answering them. Her refusal to capitalize on the fame only amplified her credibility. Reporters begged for profiles. Magazines offered covers. She turned most of them down. "This isn't about me," she told one PBS anchor. "It's about whether America can still see the kids it tries to forget." In seminar rooms from Harvard to Howard, Professors drew a new lesson from her restraint. Sometimes the most radical act is refusing to play the game of spectacle. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is consistency. And in the quiet corners of America, the bus stops, the cafeterias, the after-school programs where kids waited for parents working double shifts, her words didn't just inspire, they validated. A mother in Appalachia wrote on Facebook, "For the first time, I don't feel crazy for being angry." A teacher in New Mexico printed her quote and taped it to the wall of her trailer classroom, writing, "This is why I stay." Barron Trump, once branded as the next chapter of dynastic politics, had become a cautionary tale. His silence was now studied as much as Jasmine's words. Georgetown no longer symbolized his arrival. It symbolized his retreat. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't become a celebrity. She became something harder to dismiss, a precedent, a reminder that truth, once spoken plainly enough, doesn't fade with the news cycle. It embeds itself into the national conscience like a scar. Because what happened at Georgetown was not just about schools, or budgets, or policy. It was about who gets to define reality. Barron Trump had numbers. Jasmine Crockett had memory. And when memory speaks, numbers alone cannot erase it. Months later, a student in a South Bronx classroom, reading from a poster that bore her words, summed it up better than any headline. She didn't just talk back. She made the silence louder than his speech. The echo of Georgetown did not stop at America's borders. Within weeks, clips of Jasmine Crockett's testimony were subtitled in Spanish, French, and Arabic. A teacher in Nairobi shared the video on WhatsApp with the caption, "This is what it looks like when truth wins." In Dublin, an education conference opened with Jasmine's words on a projector screen. "We don't choose to be underfunded. We choose to survive." Delegates stood, not for her name, but for the children those words carried. At home, the ripple spread into pulpits. Sunday sermons quoted her challenge of scripture. "Have you ever learned from a book held together with tape?" Pastors asked congregations from Mississippi to Michigan. For many, it was no longer politics, it was gospel. A reminder that morality is measured not by budgets, but by whether children are fed, safe, and seen. Meanwhile, Barron Trump's absence hardened into legend, not of triumph, but of failure. Georgetown became a shorthand. To pull a Barron meant to freeze when courage was needed most. High school debaters joked about it. Late-night hosts invoked it, and scholars wrote it into case studies as the cost of silence. Even those who once defended him began to admit privately. The moment had ended any chance of him becoming the voice of a movement. But Jasmine never claimed victory. She refused the mantle of celebrity. When asked on CNN if she realized she had ended Barron's political career, she simply replied, "I wasn't trying to end anyone. I was trying to begin something." And she had. Grassroots groups sprouted almost overnight, fueled not by slogans, but by necessity. In Baltimore, parents organized a Marcus Project. In honor of the boy, Jasmine spoke of fundraising for after-school programs so kids could play without fear of stray bullets. In Chicago, students set up a tape library, collecting gently used books and covering them with duct tape to highlight the reality she described. They weren't mocking her words. They were living them and finding solidarity in the scars. By the end of the year, Project Level Field had expanded to more than 30 states. Federal lawmakers, pressed by the groundswell, introduced bipartisan legislation to increase infrastructure grants for schools with the worst facilities. For once, the bill wasn't introduced with lofty rhetoric. It was introduced with Jasmine's quote, read aloud on the House floor. And through it all, she kept walking quietly into schools no one had visited before. Cafeterias, trailer classrooms, gymnasiums with cracked floors, no headlines, no red carpets, just presence. Teachers began to say the same phrase, she showed up. That in the end was the contrast that history recorded. Barron Trump entered Georgetown with lights, donors, and cameras and left in silence. Jasmine Crockett entered with nothing but memory and left with a movement. One became a warning, the other became a witness. And witnesses, unlike heirs, cannot be erased. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.